She stood up in the middle of my mother's birthday brunch, looked straight at me, and said, "I don't love you anymore. I'm calling off the wedding." My whole family was sitting right there. My mom froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. My little sister actually dropped her glass. And me? I just nodded and said, "Thanks for telling me now, instead of at the altar." Then I reached over and said, "I'll need the ring back." She blinked, like she expected me to cry or beg. I did neither. I'm Daniel, 32 years old, and 5 weeks ago, my fiancée of 5 years, Melissa, 28, decided the best place to end our engagement was during my mother's 60th birthday celebration, surrounded by my parents, my 2 siblings, my grandmother, and a few close family friends. We had been planning our wedding for 10 months. Everything looked normal that morning. She even helped my mom pick out the cake flavor the day before. Then halfway through brunch, right after the waiter set down my plate, she just went silent. My aunt asked if she was feeling okay. Melissa took a breath and said the words that ended everything. I sat there for a few seconds, letting it sink in. Honestly, I felt calm, almost relieved. I asked for the ring, which had belonged to my late grandfather, and she slid it off her finger without a word. My grandmother actually gasped out loud. I stood up, thanked everyone for a lovely brunch, and announced that since the wedding was off, I'd be hosting a different kind of party instead. Something I'd later call the Freedom Feast. Same guest list, same venue, minus the bride. A few relatives actually laughed nervously, thinking I was joking. I wasn't. Then I mentioned one more thing before walking out. The wedding deposits, all $58,000 of them, were sitting in accounts under Melissa's name because she insisted on building her own credit history and proving she didn't need to rely on me for everything. Every single vendor contract, the venue, the photographer, the caterer, all in her name, which meant, legally, all of it now belonged to her to sort out. Her face went pale. My uncle had also promised us a wedding gift of $120,000, money meant to help us buy our first house, but that gift was tied directly to the marriage actually happening. Since there was no wedding, there was no gift. I dropped enough cash on the table to cover my untouched plate, told everyone I had a party to plan, and walked out of the restaurant. I sat in my car for almost half an hour afterward, hands shaking, but every word I said, I meant completely. 3 days after the brunch, my phone turned into a war zone. Melissa's mother called first, her voice shaking with anger. "You can't just walk away and leave her drowning in debt," she said. I stayed calm and reminded her that Melissa put every deposit under her own name and that Melissa was the one who ended things, not me. Her mom called me heartless and hung up before I could finish my sentence. An hour later, my future ex-sister-in-law sent a text saying Melissa was having a panic attack and that the wedding costs were about to destroy her financially, asking if I was really going to let that happen. I typed back a simple question. Was Melissa really going to end an engagement in front of my entire family and still expect me to pay for it? Then I answered my own question. Yes, I was absolutely going to let her handle the consequences of her own decision. I blocked her sister right after that. On Monday evening, Melissa showed up outside my apartment building. My doorbell camera caught her pacing back and forth for almost 15 minutes before she finally buzzed. I answered through the intercom instead of letting her up. She said she made a mistake, that she was overwhelmed, that we could still fix things. I told her the truth, that people don't accidentally announce they don't love someone in front of an entire family unless they mean it on some level. She tried a different angle, saying the money situation was basically financial abuse since I was refusing to help. I laughed at that one. She was the one who insisted her name go on every contract to prove her independence, and now that independence came with a price tag. She cried outside my building for another 10 minutes before finally leaving. 2 days later, her closest cousin, someone who had basically grown up like a sister to her, called me directly. She admitted Melissa handled everything badly, but said she was genuinely falling apart, unable to sleep, losing weight, terrified of the debt collectors already reaching out. I asked why any of that was suddenly my responsibility. She said it was because I still loved her. I corrected her gently. Past tense. Loved. That ended the moment Melissa chose to embarrass me at a family celebration instead of having a private, honest conversation like an adult. Wednesday morning brought the real surprise. An email from a lawyer representing Melissa, demanding I cover half of the wedding expenses because they were, according to the letter, undertaken with a mutual understanding of shared financial responsibility. My own lawyer read it and almost laughed. Every contract had Melissa's name and signature alone. There was no shared responsibility, legally or otherwise. We sent back a short, polite response, declining any further discussion. and I braced myself for whatever came next. 10 days later, things got messier than I ever expected. Melissa's father somehow tracked down my direct number at work and called me during a meeting. "You're destroying my daughter's life over pride," he said, his voice sharp and accusing. I told him plainly that his daughter destroyed her own life through her own choices, and that people face consequences when they make big decisions carelessly. He offered a compromise, splitting the wedding costs 50-50, calling it a clean slate. I declined. He asked why I was being so stubborn. I explained that this wasn't stubbornness, it was self-respect, and that ending an engagement in front of my entire family for maximum embarrassment doesn't earn someone financial rescue afterward. He tried threatening me next, saying he knew people and that I would regret this decision. I calmly reminded him that our state allows one-party phone recording and that our entire conversation was already saved. He hung up immediately. Friday brought the twist nobody saw coming. A close mutual friend finally told me the real reason behind everything. Melissa had been secretly texting and video calling a personal trainer from her gym for almost 4 months. Nothing physical, but emotionally she had already checked out of our relationship long before that brunch. She convinced herself she was falling for him and decided ending our engagement publicly was somehow her path to a fresh start. The moment this new guy found out about the $58,000 in wedding debt and the dramatic public breakup, he disappeared from her life within days. No warning, no explanation, just silence. So now she was alone, financially drowning, and completely blindsided by the very person she thought was her escape plan. Her sister showed up at my building again the following Monday, waiting in the lobby until I got home from work. Against my better judgment, I gave her 5 minutes. She described Melissa's rapid weight loss, sleepless nights, and constant calls from debt collectors, insisting the punishment didn't fit whatever crime had been committed. I reminded her calmly that I wasn't punishing anyone. I simply wasn't rescuing someone from decisions she made entirely on her own. She brought up my uncle's promised gift money, actually suggesting I ask him to give it anyway despite there being no wedding. I stared at her in disbelief, genuinely questioning whether she understood how absurd that request sounded. Tuesday delivered another unexpected message, this time from the gym trainer himself through social media. He apologized, explaining Melissa had told him she was completely single and that he had no idea an entire engagement even existed until strangers started messaging him with screenshots of the whole situation. He said she'd been overwhelming him with messages, blaming him for ruining her life, and he simply wanted me to know the truth. I thanked him for the honesty, and he unfriended me shortly after, clearly wanting nothing more to do with the chaos. Wednesday, the lawsuit officially landed, filing claims of breach of promise, unjust enrichment, and emotional distress. My lawyer wasn't worried at all, calling it a desperate nuisance case built on shaky ground. Thursday night, Melissa somehow slipped into my building when another resident held the door open, banging on my apartment for several minutes before security escorted her out while she shouted about her rights the entire way down the hallway. 2 weeks passed and the lawsuit officially got tossed out. The judge looked at the facts for maybe 10 minutes, noted that Melissa herself had ended the engagement and that every single contract carried her name alone, then dismissed the entire case without hesitation. Her lawyer was even advised to stop wasting the court's time with cases built on nothing but frustration. That entire legal mess cost me around $9,200 in fees, but honestly, every dollar felt worth it just to watch the whole thing collapse in her favor of losing. Melissa tried one final approach that same week, showing up unannounced at my parents' house. My father answered the door and later told me she stood there crying, begging him to talk some sense into me, claiming she was about to lose everything and that surely, since we were all practically family at this point, we could help cover just a portion of the debt. My father's response was short and firm. He told her plainly that she called off the wedding herself, that she was no longer family, and that his son owed her absolutely nothing. Then, he simply closed the door. When he told me the story later that evening, he added that he was genuinely proud of how I handled the entire situation, saying most men would have caved under that much pressure and guilt. But I stood my ground the whole way through. By this point, updates on Melissa's situation kept trickling in through mutual friends. She'd moved back in with her parents after breaking her apartment lease early, which came with its own set of penalties. She picked up a second job just trying to chip away at the wedding debt, and her credit score had taken a serious hit from missed payments and collection calls. She even filed for some kind of debt consolidation plan, though from what I heard, it wasn't going particularly well. Do I feel sorry about any of it? Honestly, not really. Every single decision that led her here was hers alone, made freely, without anyone forcing her hand. Finally, the day of the Freedom Feast arrived, and it turned out even better than I imagined. 32 people showed up, including close friends, my entire family, co-workers, and surprisingly, two of Melissa's own friends who privately reached out beforehand to apologize for not speaking up sooner about how badly she handled everything. We had a custom banner made that simply read, "Dodged a bullet," and it became the highlight of nearly every photo taken that night. The open bar flowed, the food was excellent, and my closest friend gave a heartfelt toast celebrating not just surviving heartbreak, but actually thriving afterward with dignity intact. Everyone raised their glasses. Laughter filled the room, and for the first time in weeks, I felt completely and genuinely at peace. I posted a handful of photos from that night on social media. Nothing dramatic, just celebration shots with friends and family, no mention of Melissa anywhere in the captions. She saw them anyway, and the very next morning her mother called me, absolutely furious, demanding to know how I could publicly mock her daughter like that. I calmly explained that I threw a private party with people I cared about and never once mentioned Melissa by name. If she felt humiliated by photos that didn't even reference her, that reaction belonged entirely to her, not to me. Her mother brought up bankruptcy again, asking if I understood the seriousness of what her daughter was facing. I told her I understood completely, and that this is exactly what happens when someone takes on nearly $60,000 of debt they can't realistically afford, then loses the one person who might have helped shoulder that burden. She asked, almost pleading at this point, whether I could simply stop being so harsh and just help with a portion of the money. I asked her to pick a single reason from a long list. Was it because her daughter ended things publicly for maximum embarrassment? Because she insisted on putting everything in her own name to prove a point about independence? Because she tried suing me afterward out of pure desperation? Any one of those reasons alone would have been enough. She hung up crying, and that was the last conversation we ever had. These days, life honestly feels lighter than it has in years. I got my grandfather's ring back, and I'm having it appraised, mostly because I don't need reminders sitting in a drawer. My apartment feels calm again. I've slowly started dating, nothing serious yet, just enjoying getting to know people without pressure. Financially, I walked away having spent roughly $10,000 total between legal fees and the party itself. Melissa, on the other hand, is dealing with debt exceeding $60,000, on top of legal costs, moving expenses, and a credit score that will take years to recover. Someone recently asked me if, now that everything has settled down, I'd ever consider stepping in to help her financially, just out of basic decency. My answer was immediate. No, not even slightly, because this was never really about money to begin with. It was about respect. She chose to end things in the most public, humiliating way possible, then genuinely expected me to fund the fallout from her own decision. That's simply not how consequences are supposed to work. She wanted to leave. That was completely her right. She wanted to do it in front of my entire family instead of privately. An unusual choice, but still her choice. She wanted every financial responsibility placed solely under her own name to prove some kind of point about independence. Fine. Bold move. But nobody gets to make all those choices and still walk away expecting someone else to clean up the mess. You either want independence or you want rescuing, not both at once. Some people online have already called me cold, even cruel, for not helping someone I once loved deeply. Others say I did exactly what anyone with self-respect should have done. Maybe both opinions have some truth buried inside them. What I do know is this. When someone shows you exactly who they are through their actions, believe them the first time. And when someone tries to turn their own consequences into your problem, sometimes the most caring thing you can do, both for them and for yourself, is simply let them face it alone. So tell me honestly, would you have helped her? Or would you have walked away just like I did?